Hello everyone, I'm Crystal and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be showing you how I created this thank you card using colored pencils and mineral spirits. So let's go ahead and get started. So let's go ahead and start prepping our cardstock. I'm using the Embossing Buddy from Stampin' Up. That's actually going to help me continue the stamping with Versamark ink. It's basically a sticky ink that's going to hold all the embossing powder together. So I go ahead and proceed on stamping all of my images first, all around the actual cardstock. Once I have all my images stamped and with the powder, then I go ahead and use my heating tool to go ahead and heat up that actual powder. Now you do want to go ahead and make sure that all the little pieces that kind of linger around, you can use a small brush and take those away. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to show you on real time how I started coloring each individual flower. Now, as you can see, I have three tones of grays. Obviously, they're not in the same family, but the medium tone that I decided to use is the first one that I have in my hand right now. That's actually a slate gray, and I actually have those from Utrecht. I'm not sure if they're still around or if they're actually considered a Blick brand now, but they're actually really great to have around. They're actually very smooth, so for my liking, it's actually a good start for a medium tone color, depending on which color, of course, you decide to choose first. For the two colors or the two tones that I have on the side, those are actually from Prismacolors. Those are a little bit heavy when it comes to how dark you actually want them. The actual two grays that I have, they're actually a warm gray of 70% and a cool gray of 20%. Now the lightest color that I chose, obviously I didn't want to go any lighter than that because it would probably be very close to the white of the embossing. I didn't want to go too close to that white just because I wanted to keep it in the gray tones. Other than that, it would just interfere with the actual white embossing around the actual flowers. Now, if you notice, what I'm doing right now is just basically having a very light hand and going into very small circular motions. I didn't want to go too dark at the very beginning, just because I know that I'm going to be grabbing that last color of dark gray. Once I have a base idea of where I have my lights and my darks, I go ahead and start adding the coolest, or the not the coolest, the lightest color, and kind of get an idea where that lights I want the lights coming from. I normally tend to go towards the tips of the petals, but that's really up to you where your light is coming from. The same thing, like I said, is just very small motions. Make sure that all your color pencils are nice and nice and sharp, so it's a lot easier to um, make those smaller circles and not leave an actual dent of the actual colored pencil. Now, at this time, I'm going ahead and starting my very first coat of mineral spirits. Now, I prefer to have my mineral spirits in a small container just because I don't normally use very much. Just a little bit actually goes a long way. So I'm going ahead and basically dipping the brush barely onto the very tips of the bristles and then adding it to my color pencil. The actual mixture, it actually dissolves, or it almost melts the actual marks that you make with the color pencils, and gives you some sort of airbrush look. Now it's up to you if you want to go a little bit darker than that. Obviously, you can make more marks and it gives you a color pencil look. But in this case, I'm going towards a more airbrush look at the final stage. Now I'm going ahead and doing the darkest gray. Now obviously that is not a black, but it's very close to. So you have to be sure that you're not overdoing it at the very beginning. Like I mentioned, use a very light hand. That way it's a little bit easier to add on a little darker areas instead of just going ahead and starting too dark, because it's very, very hard to take that away once you start putting darker tones in. But I normally go ahead and at least try to do a little bit darker just on the petals that are probably going to be in the far background, or at the very middle of the flower. That normally tends to be a little bit darker. But go little by little. Don't overdo it at the very beginning. And like I mentioned, you don't normally need too much mineral spirits on your brush. And if you notice, my brush is an actual angle brush. To me, that's a little bit easier for me to handle when I'm doing smaller pieces. Just that way I can go ahead and go into the smaller crevices of my drawing. Now, sometimes you do end up with a little bit of mineral spirits on your actual embossing on the white area. And you can also, you go ahead and just smudge it like I just did with my fingers and kind of clear that off and smooth all the areas all around. At this time, I went ahead and decided to add a little bit more of that gray, the lightest gray tone, just so I can make sure that it pops out a little bit more, especially since I did use a little bit more dark gray at the very bottom of the flower. But that's basically what it is. You can certainly be able to leave it that way, have the pencil look, or go ahead and use a very dry brush, the same brush I'm using, but just kind of dab it off, and brush or dissolve any little residue left to create a more airbrush look. So that's basically it. That's the very beginning of one flower. I'm going to go ahead and turn up the music and show you a little bit faster on the rest of the flowers. Okay, so I am now finishing up the very last flower. Now I actually changed something in between while I was working. I changed the order of the color pencils that I'm using. Now instead of using the medium tone and the lightest tone, I went ahead and used the medium with the darkest. It kind of gave it a little bit more drastic look at the end. And once I actually did that, then I was able to add the brightest or the lightest color for my highlights and then mix that up with the mineral spirits. I thought that was a little bit easier, or sometimes I think at the end it was a little bit faster for me to finish it. But it gave it a nice look, softer, smoother look, let's say that. Now, at this time, I normally do 2 cards at the same time. Normally just one to keep and or for references, and obviously one to give away. I went ahead and stamped "Thank You" right in the middle with black ink, and used my jelly roll for little extras, especially in the little between areas of the flowers. I thought it gave it a little bit more of a finished look. I'm just basically doodling some flowers or little leaves, let's say that. I also went ahead and gave it a little bit of highlights on each individual letter, and added some extra black dots around the area. Now I'm using a Copic marker. It's actually a C3 if you see that on the video. And then it's just basically giving it a shadow for each individual flower. I went ahead and added a little bit of embellishments with white and gray string, and making a cute little bow on the middle. Now with tacky glue, I normally add a little bit of tacky glue on each individual bow, basically to just hold it down. So if I'm making a bow, I like to keep it the same way every time instead of just moving around or maybe untying itself. So I think it gives it a little bit better hold. So now let's go ahead and do the inside of the card. I am using 2 particular sentiments. Sorry about my head there. I'm trying to make sure it's right in the middle. The first sentiment is with heartfelt thanks. That's actually from Hampton Art, and that's Color Me Grateful. Those are the stamps, are the ones that are on the side of the page with the flowers. Hopefully I'll be using another card for those. And the second one is from Stampin' Up, which is, I think it's from the 98 collection. So it's one of my go-to stamps as well. So now I'm going ahead and doing the same technique that I did in the front. I only stamped one flower in the corner and did the same technique, which is the color pencils and the mineral spirits. I also added a couple little bit more details when it came to the jelly roll. Added the leaves and the dots, as well as the shadows behind the flower. I also went ahead and used my Wink of Stella and added a little bit of shimmer. That's the pen that actually has a lot of glitter, so it gives it a lot of pop. You don't notice it as much on the video, but once you're actually holding the card, it gives it just a beautiful look at each individual flower. So now let's go ahead and do the envelope. I like to keep the same idea from the card to make it match. I went ahead and used the same stamps, which is the thank you stamp. And I also used the same stamp from the flower. I'm actually using from Stampin' Up the actual smoky slate ink. I think it's normally a little bit darker. It's just my ink has actually I've been using it for quite a bit, so it's not as strong as it could be. But I go ahead and use the flower stamp and cover up the border of the front as well as the back flap. I think it actually gives it a finished look overall. So, and at the very end, I went ahead and did the same thing. Added the dots with my Copic marker as well as my markers to give it a little bit more of a magical look or feeling from the inside of the card. So let's go ahead and finish up our card. I'm using a foam tape on the back of the front. I go ahead and adhere that to an A2 card. That kind of gives it a little bit of extra dimension. And I use my runner tape on the inside of the card, make sure that's centered. I decided to go ahead and add a little bit of embellishment on the front, and I used 3 little diamonds, one right in the middle of the bow, as well as 2 on the outside. I made sure that I use a tacky glue to make sure that actually stay there without falling off later. So that's it. That finishes up my card. I want to go ahead and say thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed and hopefully learned something. If you do have any questions or concerns, please do contact me or comment below. And I hope you guys have a great day.